Well, welcome to another daily devotional. We are continuing our little story through the book of 1 Samuel. Today we are in 1 Samuel chapter 22. So yesterday we talked about David being at the temple getting fed. And there was a little detail that I don't know if you caught when you read it yesterday, that there was a man there that was part of Saul's army that saw David in the temple. So now that we're now into chapter 22, the drama begins to come out. And what happens is it gets back to Saul that David is in this temple where David is at. So then all of a sudden it begins to stir up into Saul just how angry he is at David and how prideful he is. And it just the spirit inside of him begins to come up like never before. And it just says this. This is just absolutely crazy. So Saul is talking to one of the priests. So he has that priest that helped David out, and he calls that priest to him. Okay. So a priest, typically, your boss is God, right? If you're a pastor, if you're a priest, if you're a prophet, for any of these things, your boss is God. Like everything you do in life is dependent on what does God say. That is your priority at all the time, right? What God says goes. He's the one I'm trying to please, all of those kinds of things. So in this situation where the priest fed David, he was doing what God told him to do, to feed David. But Saul begins to get offended, and looks what he says. Why have you conspired against me, you and the son of Jesse, giving him bread and a sword and inquiring of God for him, so that he has rebelled against me and lies in wait for me as he does today? So Saul begins to get this attitude about himself towards the priest and says, okay, whose side are you on, priest? And he's talking to him. Why are you conspiring against me, the king? But then, and the priest doesn't necessarily say this, but I think the priest almost just should have said, I'm loyal to God. And look what the priest says. Who of all your servants is as loyal as David, the king's son-in-law, captain of your holy bodyguard, and highly respected in your household? He begins to say, hey, David's a good guy, Saul. He's actually not a bad guy. He's a great person. He even loves you. He even cares about you. I was helping one of God's servants. The person that's in charge here is God. And Saul begins to put himself in the place of being God, of saying, you're either on my team or you're on the enemy's team, is what Saul was saying. He begins to forget the fact that he was installed by God. God made him king. The reason he's even king is because of God. And this is something that we can very easily have a tendency to do, is begin to make it us versus the world, and we begin to actually remove ourselves from God's team, and we become offended when other people are on God's team if it is something that harms us. So in this whole situation, all that Saul cared about was Saul. He cared about his image. He cared about him being king. That's all he cared about. He didn't care about what does God want in this situation. And many times in our families, we can become offended when other people do God's will and our family's not doing the will of God, and all of a sudden they say something, we get defensive, and we say, you can't do that, you can't do this because you're against my family now. When that person's saying, we're not against your family, we're just on God's team. And parents will have a tendency of doing this. They'll say, don't ever correct my children. Don't ever tell me that my kids are doing something wrong. Don't ever do that. When the person's saying, I'm not against you, I'm on God's team. And what we can do is someone could be giving godly influence into us, into our children. People could be giving godly advice, could be speaking life into us. But we can be like Saul, and we can make it you versus us. Instead of it being like, hey, this is a God thing. God is the boss. God is in priority. And we must humble ourselves above all else. And that same Psalm 34 that is talking about this whole situation in this season of life that David wrote in, the thing that David said is, blessed are those who humble themselves before the Lord. And many times we'll receive correction, we'll receive input, there'll be situations that happen around us. There's been so many times in my life that I've had that spirit rise up in me to begin to become defensive, to begin to want to attack others, to begin to feel like other people are against me. And I have to say, wait a second. Okay, God, this is about you. This isn't about me. Is this your will, God? And many times I've been humbled, and God will let me know, hey, this is my doing. You need to be okay with this. I'm trying to grow you. I'm trying to help you. But many times our tendency can be to make it us versus them, when it's not at all like that. God is in control, and we must always put on our mind, okay, God, what is it that you're doing in this situation? What do I need to be doing in this situation? God, you are the boss, and not go against the people that have placed God as their boss, and to begin to have unity issues amongst one another. One of our values here at Christian Life Center is unity. And the way that we can all be in unity together is if we all realize God is in control, not us, not somebody else. This isn't about us. This isn't about them. It's all about God. All the time, it's about God. And if we can just realize that, it'll keep us from being crazy like Saul and pushing away every meaningful relationship in our lives. So I pray that today that God is the God of your life, that he'll be in control, that you'll humble yourself, listen to his voice today. We love you and hope to see you tomorrow.